It all started on what was supposed to be a peaceful weekend at our family cabin, tucked away in the woods where the world felt quiet and calm. My wife and I had come here to escape the constant noise of HOA drama back home, thinking this would finally be a place where no one could bother us. But little did we know, trouble was about to find us anyway. Out of nowhere, the infamous HOA Karen showed up. She had been the source of endless headaches for the community with her constant complaints, power trips, and her belief that she controlled everything. This time, she decided to take things further than anyone ever imagined. With a smug look, she pulled out what she called her master key. Without hesitation, she walked right up to our cabin door, as if she owned the place, and tried to let herself in. My wife and I stood frozen for a moment, shocked at her boldness. The cabin was our safe space, our private getaway, and here was someone trying to invade it like it was hers to claim. Every second felt heavier as the key rattled against the lock. But what she didn't know was that my wife had been one step ahead of her. Instead of panic, she calmly stepped forward, holding something Karen never expected to see, an official arrest warrant. The look on Karen's face instantly changed from arrogance to disbelief. She froze, hand still on the doorknob, unable to process what was about to happen. And that's where everything turned upside down. The quiet cabin weekend became the scene of a confrontation that no one in the neighborhood would ever forget. But how did we even get to this moment? And what happened next? That's where the real story begins. Karen stood frozen at the door, her so-called master key trembling in her hand as my wife's calm but firm voice cut through the silence. The arrest warrant wasn't just a piece of paper. It was the result of weeks of quiet preparation. What Karen didn't realize was that her behavior had been watched closely, not just by us, but by others in the community who had finally grown tired of her endless power plays. But before diving into how that document came to be, you have to understand how this battle really started. The cabin wasn't just any cabin. It was my grandfather's, passed down to me, a place filled with memories of family, laughter, and peace. It was never part of the HOA's jurisdiction, which made it even more strange that Karen felt entitled to it. For her, control wasn't limited to neighborhood fences or trash cans left out a little too long. It extended to anything she set her eyes on. She had spent years building a reputation as the woman who always got her way, intimidating neighbors with rulebooks, threats of fines, and her fake sense of authority. But this time, she pushed too far. A few weeks earlier, we had started noticing small things that didn't add up. Footprints near the cabin steps when no one had been there, a window latch disturbed, even whispers from neighbors about Karen bragging that every property in the area should follow her rules. We didn't want to believe she would go this far, but the signs were all there. So while she thought she was catching us off guard by forcing her way into our sanctuary, the truth was that she had walked straight into the trap of her own arrogance. And the moment my wife revealed that warrant, the stage was set for something no one could turn back from. Karen's eyes darted between the paper in my wife's hand and the cabin door she had been so sure she could claim. For the first time, the woman who loved to bark orders looked unsure of herself. But what unsettled her even more was the realization that we weren't acting alone. From the shadows of the trees, two of our neighbors slowly stepped forward. They had followed us here, not to intrude, but because they too were tired of Karen's bullying and wanted to witness what might finally put an end to it. The conflict wasn't only about one cabin or one weekend. It was years in the making. Karen had built a reputation around fear, threatening homeowners with fines, showing up unannounced at their doors, even spreading rumors about anyone who dared challenge her. Many neighbors had quietly shared their frustrations with us, but most were too scared to act. When we told them what she had been hinting at about the cabin, their fear turned into anger. That anger became the first crack in Karen's control. What she didn't expect was that my wife had been quietly working with local authorities, gathering testimonies, keeping records, and building a case. The arrest warrant wasn't a bluff. It was backed by a mountain of proof that could finally expose Karen for the abuse of power everyone had suffered under. But in that tense moment outside the cabin, the paper itself was only half the battle. Karen's pride wouldn't let her back down so easily. She straightened her shoulders, hiding her panic behind a thin smile, and muttered something about misunderstandings. Yet the way her hand gripped that so-called master key told another story. She wasn't ready to give up control. And that meant the real fight was only just beginning. The air around the cabin grew heavier with each passing second. Karen's forced smile wavered as the silence stretched, broken only by the soft rustling of leaves. My wife stood steady, holding the warrant like a shield, while our neighbors shifted closer, their eyes locked on Karen. For once, she wasn't in control, and that realization was starting to crack her carefully built facade. She tried to talk her way out, claiming the master key was given to her for emergencies, but no one was buying it. Everyone knew Karen loved control too much to stop at emergencies. My wife didn't say a word. She didn't need to. The weight of the document in her hand spoke louder than any argument. The neighbor's presence only deepened the tension, as if the entire community had silently gathered here, waiting for this exact moment. Then the unexpected happened. Karen stepped closer to the door, pressing the key harder into the lock, as if proving she still had the final say. My heart pounded as I realized she wasn't backing down. She was doubling down. Her voice trembled with false confidence as she declared that the cabin belonged to the HOA now. The words hung in the air, sharp and unbelievable. My wife's grip tightened, and I could see the storm building in her eyes. The neighbors exchanged uneasy glances. Everyone understood we had reached the point of no return. Karen wasn't just trespassing anymore. She was challenging everything, daring us to stop her. The cabin, once our safe haven, had become the center of a showdown years in the making. And as Karen twisted that key with defiance, the tension snapped into something electric. We all knew the next moment would decide everything. Just as Karen forced the key deeper into the lock, a sharp crack echoed through the air, not from the door, but from the gravel driveway behind us. We all turned, and there stood a county officer, stepping out of his car with a clipboard in hand. The timing was too perfect, almost as if fate had decided this confrontation needed another witness. His sudden arrival shifted the balance instantly, and for a brief moment no one moved. Karen's face went pale. She had spent years bluffing neighbors with threats of legal action, but now an actual officer stood within arm's reach. Still, she wasn't ready to surrender her control. She quickly shoved the key into her pocket and tried to compose herself, waving her hand as if everything was just a misunderstanding between friends. But the officer wasn't buying her act. His eyes narrowed as he glanced at my wife, then at the paper she held, and finally at Karen's trembling hands. The neighbor stepped forward, voices low but firm, sharing how Karen had been overstepping her authority for months. Each word added weight to the moment, exposing more of the truth she had worked so hard to keep hidden. Karen's false smile cracked, replaced by the look of someone realizing her entire empire of fear might be crumbling right in front of her. Then came the twist none of us expected. The officer revealed that Karen wasn't just facing trouble for trespassing. There were already ongoing complaints filed against her, some far more serious than anyone had known. That revelation made the air buzz with tension. Karen's eyes widened, her confidence draining. Suddenly, this wasn't just about our cabin. It was about everything she had done catching up with her at once. And we all knew the breaking point was moments away. Karen's mask finally shattered as the officer stepped closer, his voice steady but firm. My wife handed him the warrant, and in that instant, the years of intimidation and bullying that Karen had built her power on collapsed. She tried to argue, claiming she was only protecting community interests, but the officer cut her off, stating plainly that her actions had crossed into criminal territory. The neighbors, once too afraid to speak up, now stood tall, their words flowing freely as they confirmed every accusation. For the first time, Karen was the one cornered, and she knew it. When the officer asked her to hand over the so-called master key, Karen's hands shook as she pulled it from her pocket. The clink of metal as it dropped into his hand echoed like a final nail in the coffin of her control. My wife's expression softened, relief mixing with strength, as the paper that had once been a silent plan turned into the very thing that broke Karen's grip on the neighborhood. But just as it seemed the nightmare was ending, the officer revealed the twist no one saw coming. The master key Karen had been carrying wasn't just for our cabin. It was a copy tied to several other properties in the area, places she had quietly been targeting for months. What we thought was one violation turned out to be part of something much larger. The neighbors gasped, realizing their own homes may have been on her list. The officer assured us this was only the beginning of the investigation, but the message was clear. Karen's empire of fear had finally collapsed. Yet, as she was led away, the thought lingered. If she had gone this far in secret, what else had she left behind? As the officer led Karen away, the tension that had weighed on all of us seemed to finally lift. The cabin stood quiet again, its wooden frame holding the peace it was always meant to give. My wife lowered the warrant, and for the first time in weeks, I saw her shoulders relax. The neighbors gathered close, no longer whispering in fear but speaking openly, grateful that someone had finally stood up against the person who had made their lives so difficult. What once felt like a private battle over our cabin had turned into a turning point for the whole community. Over the next few days, the truth about the master key spread quickly. Families checked their locks, shared stories, and began realizing they weren't alone. The HOA, stripped of Karen's grip, started to rebuild with new leadership, people who valued fairness over fear. It wasn't easy, but step by step, trust was restored. The arrest warrant had done more than stop Karen at our door. It had given everyone the courage to speak out. For my wife and me, the cabin returned to being what it was always meant to be, a safe haven, untouched by the noise of HOA politics. Sitting on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the trees, we finally felt the quiet we had been searching for. But we also carried a new awareness. Power left unchecked can twist even the smallest rules into weapons, and silence only feeds it. The biggest takeaway was clear. Standing together is stronger than standing alone. One piece of paper, one act of courage, and one community willing to face the truth had been enough to end years of intimidation. And though the fight was over, the lesson would stay with us and our neighbors for years to come.